The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm, amber glow across our quiet suburban street. I stood by the living room window, watching as the shadows grew longer and the night slowly crept in. Our home always felt the coziest at this time of day. A sanctuary, a place I thought was unshakable. But tonight, something about the air felt different. Laura, my wife, was due to return from her business trip. She loved these work trips, always claiming they gave her a sense of freedom and space to grow professionally. I never questioned it. If anything, I admired her ambition. But this time, something gnawed at me, a strange unease that I couldn't shake. When she finally walked through the door, the first thing I noticed was her smile. She looked radiant, almost glowing, as if she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her entire demeanor seemed lighter, almost carefree. She stood there for a moment, suitcase in hand, her eyes scanning the room. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice bright, almost too bright. "I'm home." I managed to smile and stepped forward to greet her. "Welcome back," I said, trying to sound casual. But deep down, that knot in my stomach tightened. Something felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way her smile lingered just a second too long, or how her eyes didn't quite meet mine. She placed her suitcase by the door and pulled me into a quick hug. Her perfume, something new, something unfamiliar, lingered in the air as she pulled away. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. But then she spotted the dinner table. I had set everything up earlier. A quiet dinner for two, her favorite wine, and a small bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. It was my way of welcoming her back, of reminding her that I'd missed her. But when she saw it, her smile faltered for the briefest moment. It was subtle, just a flicker, but enough for me to notice. "This is lovely," she said, her voice slightly strained. She glanced at the flowers, then back at me, her smile returning but not reaching her eyes. We sat down to eat, and I tried to make conversation, asking her about her trip. She talked, but her answers felt rehearsed, as if she was reading from a script. "Denver was great. The meetings went well. Oh, and the hotel had the most amazing view," she said, her voice cheerful but somehow hollow. I nodded along, asking a question here and there, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop analyzing every word, every movement. She was too polished, too perfect. Her laugh felt forced, her tone overly enthusiastic. And then there was her phone. She kept it face down on the table, something she never used to do. It was such a small detail, but it gnawed at me. After dinner, she excused herself to take a shower, leaving me alone with the empty plates and a half-finished bottle of wine. I sat there, staring at the flickering candlelight, my mind racing. Every little oddity from the past few weeks came flooding back. The late nights at the office, the sudden work trips, the way she'd been more protective of her phone. It all added up to something I didn't want to admit. Then I saw her suitcase, still sitting by the door, slightly unzipped. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I walked over and opened it. Her clothes were neatly folded, as always, but tucked into the side pocket was a small velvet jewelry box. My breath caught as I picked it up, my hands trembling. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped charm. I didn't buy this for her. Before I could process what I was looking at, I heard her voice from the staircase. "What are you doing?" I turned around to see her standing there, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. Her face was pale, her expression frozen in shock. The glow she'd walked in with was gone, replaced by something darker. Fear. Maybe even guilt. I held up the necklace. "What's this, Laura?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of the question hung heavy in the air. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I realized I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. Laura stood there, frozen at the top of the stairs. The towel wrapped around her seemed to tighten, as though she were trying to shield herself from what was coming next. Her silence was deafening, louder than any excuse she could have blurted out. I held the necklace up again, shaking it slightly, hoping, no, begging, for her to say something that would make it all make sense. "Curtis?" she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can explain." I let out a hollow laugh. Explain? What could she possibly explain? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a drumbeat of anger, confusion, and betrayal. "Then explain, Laura," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to demand answers. "Go ahead. Who gave you this? Why was it hidden in your suitcase?" She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she clutched the towel tighter, her knuckles white. I could see her mind racing, searching for a way out, a way to twist the truth into something palatable. But I wasn't in the mood for half-truths or carefully crafted lies. "It's just a gift," she said finally, her voice uneven. "From a colleague. It's nothing, Curtis. You're overthinking this." "A gift," I repeated, my voice rising. "From who? And why would a colleague give you a necklace like this? Do you take me for an idiot?" Her face flushed, and she took a step down the stairs, her expression hardening. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, her tone defensive now. "I didn't think I'd have to justify every little thing to you. Every little thing." The word stung like a slap. This wasn't just a little thing. It was the unraveling of trust, the foundation of our marriage cracking beneath my feet. I placed the necklace on the table and stared at her, my anger giving way to something deeper, darker. "If it's nothing, why didn't you tell me about it?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less intense. "Why hide it in your suitcase?" She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, her phone buzzed on the counter. That sound, it was like a gunshot in the silence. Laura's eyes darted to the phone, and in that split second, everything changed. She bolted down the stairs, reaching for it, but I was faster. I grabbed it before she could, holding it out of her reach. "Curtis, give it to me," she yelled, panic creeping into her voice. "You have no right to go through my phone." "No right?" I shot back, my hands shaking as I unlocked the screen. "I have every right, Laura. I'm your husband. Or did you forget that?" Her face paled as I scrolled through her messages. At first, it was nothing, work emails, group chats, the usual. But then I found it. A message thread with someone named M. My stomach dropped as I opened it, the words on the screen blurring as my eyes scanned the conversation. "M. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Laura. I know. I'm counting the days until next time. You make me feel alive." I froze, the phone slipping from my fingers and landing on the table with a dull thud. For a moment, the world stopped. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as though it were suffocating me. I looked up at Laura, who was staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Curtis," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, a sound that felt foreign even to me. "It's not what it looks like?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me. All this time you've been lying." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stepped closer, reaching out to me. "Please let me explain. It's complicated." I took a step back, putting distance between us. "Complicated," I said, my voice breaking. "It's not complicated, Laura. You made a choice. You betrayed me. And now I don't even know who you are." She collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had been replaced by a stranger. And the life we'd built together, our home, our dreams, our future, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I turned away, walking to the window and staring out into the darkness. My reflection stared back at me, a man I barely recognized. My chest felt tight, my thoughts racing. What had I done to deserve this? Was it my fault? Could I have seen the signs earlier? Behind me, Laura's sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Not yet. My world was crumbling, and I didn't know how to stop it. The room felt heavy, like the walls were closing in, pressing down on me with the weight of everything I just uncovered. Laura was still sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands, her sobs muffled but relentless. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand she tell me everything. But I just stood there, frozen, staring out the window as the darkness outside mirrored the chaos inside me. "Curtis!" Her voice broke the silence, trembling, fragile. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. If I looked at her, I might shatter into a million pieces. "Please, say something." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Say something?" I said, my voice low and strained. "What am I supposed to say, Laura? That it's okay? That we can just move past this? Because I don't think I can." She let out a choked sob, and for a moment, the room was silent again. Then she started talking, her words tumbling out in a rush, like she was desperate to fill the void. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I swear, Curtis, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I finally turned to face her, my chest tightening as I looked at her tear-streaked face. "Didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "So what, Laura? You tripped and fell into someone else's arms? Someone else's bed?" Her face crumpled, and she shook her head. "It's not like that. You don't understand." "Then make me understand," I shouted, the words ripping from my throat. "Make me understand how the woman I've loved for 10 years, the woman I built my life with, could do this to me, to us." She stared at me, her lips trembling, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then she looked away, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It started during one of my trips," she said, her voice so soft I had to strain to hear her. "We were out for drinks after a long day, and, I don't know, he made me feel—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," I interrupted, my voice cold and sharp. "Don't you dare tell me he made you feel something I couldn't." Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, and for the first time that night, I saw something other than guilt in her expression. Defiance. Anger. "You don't get it, Curtis," she said, her voice rising. "You're so busy being the perfect husband, the perfect provider, that you don't even see me anymore. I've been drowning in this marriage, and you didn't even notice." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, my hands gripping the edge of the dining table for support. "So this is my fault now?" I said, my voice hollow. "You're blaming me for your choices? For your betrayal?" She stood up, the towel slipping slightly as she moved closer to me. "I'm not blaming you," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I'm just trying to make you understand. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did," I said, my voice breaking. "You did hurt me, Laura. You destroyed me." Tears streamed down her face, and for a moment, I thought she might reach out to me. But then her phone buzzed again, shattering whatever fragile connection we still had. I stared at it, sitting there on the table like a ticking time bomb. Without thinking, I grabbed it and held it out to her. "Answer it," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Go ahead. Let's see what he has to say." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. "Curtis, please. Answer it," I yelled, slamming the phone onto the table. The force of it made her flinch, and for a moment we just stared at each other, the room crackling with tension. The phone buzzed again, and this time I picked it up. My hands were trembling as I swiped to answer, putting it on speaker. "Hello," I said, my voice flat. There was silence on the other end, and then a man's voice, deep and smooth, came through the line. "Laura, is everything okay? I've been waiting to hear from you." My blood ran cold. I glanced at Laura, who was now pale as a ghost, her hands covering her mouth. She looked like she might faint. Everything's fine, I said, my voice dripping with venom. But maybe you should tell me who the hell you are. The line went dead. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then I turned to Laura, my heart pounding in my chest. Start talking, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Who is he? And don't you dare lie to me. She didn't respond. Instead, she sank back onto the couch, her shoulders shaking as fresh sobs racked her body. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook. Not this time. Laura, I said, my voice steadier now. I need the truth. All of it. Right now. She looked up at me, her face a mask of pain and regret. His name is Mark, she said finally, her voice barely audible. He's a colleague, and I think I've fallen in love with him. The words hit me like a freight train. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Love? She thought she was in love with him? My head spun, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. I need some air, I said, my voice shaking. Without waiting for her to respond, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, into the cold night. The chill hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain. Nothing was. I stood there on the porch, staring up at the stars, wondering how my life had come to this. How had the cold night air felt sharp against my skin, but it wasn't enough to clear the fog in my mind. I stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The words Laura had just said echoed in my head. I think I've fallen in love with him. How could she say that to me? How could she admit something so devastating, as though it were just another casual conversation? I felt a storm brewing inside me. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, all colliding and threatening to consume me. I didn't know how long I stood there, but eventually, the front door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see her face, not after what she'd just admitted. Curtis? Her voice was soft, tentative, as if she were afraid to approach me. Please? Can we talk? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Talk, I said, my voice low and shaking. What is there to talk about, Laura? You just told me you're in love with someone else. What am I supposed to say to that? She stepped closer, and I could hear the hesitation in her movements. I didn't mean for it to come out like that, she said, her voice cracking. It's just, I've been so confused, Curtis. I don't even know who I am anymore. I turned to face her, the porch light casting a harsh glow on her tear-streaked face. She looked smaller somehow, like a shadow of the confident woman I'd married. But I wasn't ready to feel pity for her. Not yet. You don't know who you are? I repeated bitterly. Well, let me remind you, you're my wife. Or at least you were. Her lips trembled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shield herself from the cold, or from me. I never stopped loving you, Curtis, she said, her voice barely audible. I need you to know that. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice rising. Not after what you've done. Love isn't just a word you throw around when it's convenient. Love is loyalty, it's trust, and you've broken both. Her shoulders shook as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't want this to happen, she said, her voice desperate. I didn't plan for any of this. Mark, he was just there, and I don't know, Curtis. I was lonely. Lonely? I snapped, the words slicing through me like a blade. You were lonely? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to make sure you never felt that way? Everything I've done, every late night, every sacrifice was for you. For us. She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. I know, she whispered. I know, Curtis, and I hate myself for what I've done. But I can't undo it. I can't take it back. The raw honesty in her voice cut through my anger, leaving me with nothing but the unbearable weight of my heartbreak. I turned away from her, staring out into the dark, empty street. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, my voice quieter now. Why didn't you come to me when you started feeling this way? We could have worked through it. We could have fixed it. I didn't know how, she said, stepping closer. I was scared. Scared of hurting you. Scared of admitting that I wasn't happy. I laughed again, but this time it was hollow, empty. Well, congratulations, Laura, I said, turning to face her. You succeeded in destroying me instead. She reached out to me then, her fingers brushing against my arm. Curtis, please, she whispered. I'll do anything to make this right. Just tell me what to do. I stepped back, her touch burning like fire against my skin. I don't know if there's anything left to fix, I said, my voice breaking. You've shattered everything, Laura, and I don't know if I can put it back together. The silence between us was deafening, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, I turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing on the porch. I couldn't be near her right now, couldn't look at her without feeling the crushing weight of betrayal. Inside, I sat down at the dining table, my head in my hands. The necklace still lay there, a cruel reminder of the lies she'd been hiding. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of my life that had been so suddenly and violently torn apart. What was I supposed to do? Could I forgive her? Could I even trust her again? The answers eluded me, slipping through my fingers like sand. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the life I thought was perfect, was gone. And I had no idea what came next. Upstairs, I could hear the shower running. The sound of the water was a cruel echo of her earlier confession, a reminder that she had shared parts of herself with someone else. My stomach churned, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. I needed to get out of there, to escape the suffocating walls of our home. As I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, my mind replayed every moment of the evening, every word she had said. And for the first time, I realized just how alone I truly was. The hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me company as I drove through the deserted streets. Streetlights flickered above, their cold glow reflecting my state of mind, flickering between clarity and chaos. I wasn't going anywhere specific. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and the house that no longer felt like home. I pulled over near a park where Laura and I used to go on lazy Sunday afternoons. Back then, things were simple. We'd bring a picnic, lie on a blanket under the trees, and talk about everything and nothing. Those memories now felt like relics of another lifetime, a life that no longer belonged to me. I stepped out of the car and sat on a bench overlooking the empty playground. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. My thoughts spiraled as I tried to make sense of everything Laura had said. Lonely? How could she feel lonely when I was right there beside her, doing everything I could to make her happy? But then, a thought crept in, one I'd been too afraid to face. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe, in my quest to provide for her, to give her the life she deserved, I had neglected the one thing that mattered most, our connection. My chest tightened at the thought. Was this my fault? Had I failed her in some way? It was easier to stay angry, to blame her for everything. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the cracks that had been forming in our relationship long before Mark entered the picture. When I finally returned home, the house was dark and eerily quiet. Laura's suitcase was gone from the hallway, but the necklace still sat on the table where I'd left it. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to throw it away, smash it, or just leave it there as a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps heavy, and stopped outside our bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and I could see Laura sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders were slumped, her entire posture radiating defeat. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her. She looked so small, so broken. It was a stark contrast to the confident, vibrant woman I had married. "Curtis?" she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't think you'd come back. I didn't know if I would," I admitted, stepping into the room. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. But here I am. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. I don't know what to say anymore. I feel like I've already said everything, and none of it's enough. You're right, I said, my voice cold. It's not enough. Nothing you say can fix this, Laura. But that doesn't mean I don't need to hear it. She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. I've been trying to figure out why I let this happen, she said quietly. And the truth is, I don't even have a good answer. I was selfish. I wanted more, and I didn't stop to think about what it would cost. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I wanted to yell at her, to demand she give me something, anything, that would make this pain go away. But I knew there was no magic answer, no explanation that could erase what she had done. Do you love him? I asked, the question tearing its way out of me before I could stop it. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. I don't know, she whispered. I thought I did. But now I'm not sure of anything. Her uncertainty stung more than a definitive answer would have. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice barely audible. I don't know if I can be with someone who doesn't even know what she wants. Curtis, please, she said, her voice breaking. I want us. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked back at her, my heart aching with the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. But another part of me, one that was growing louder by the second, wasn't sure if that was possible. I don't know if that's enough, I said finally. I need time, Laura. Time to figure out if I can even look at you without seeing him. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I left the room then, retreating to the guest bedroom and closing the door behind me. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness I felt inside. As I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that the path ahead was anything but clear. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I had the strength to walk it. The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet. I woke up in the guest bedroom, the unfamiliarity of the space amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that last night had been a nightmare. But the heavy feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I could hear Laura moving around downstairs, her footsteps soft and hesitant. The smell of coffee wafted through the air, a cruel reminder of how normal things used to feel. I didn't want to face her, but avoiding her wouldn't make this any easier. When I finally walked into the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, her back to me. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, and she was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. She must have heard me come in, but she didn't turn around. I made coffee, she said quietly, her voice strained. Your mug is on the table. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat down at the table and stared at the steaming cup in front of me. The silence between us was suffocating, filled with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to break it, to demand answers, but I didn't even know where to start. Curtis, she said finally, her voice trembling. She turned to face me, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to know if you're going to give me a chance to fix this. I looked up at her, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I don't know, Laura, I said honestly. I don't know if this can be fixed. Her face crumpled, and she took a step closer. Please, she whispered. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Therapy? Counseling? Do you think sitting in a room with a stranger and talking about our feelings is going to undo what you did? Because I don't. She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I regretted saying them. But I was too hurt, too angry to take them back. I know I can't undo it, she said, her voice breaking. But I want to try, Curtis. I want to fight for us. I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. But the other part of me, the part that had seen those messages and heard her confession, wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't have an answer for you right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll wait, as long as it takes. Her words felt like a lifeline, but they also felt like a weight. I didn't respond. I just stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I needed space, needed to clear my head and figure out what came next. I drove aimlessly for hours, watching the world move past my window while my mind remained stuck in the same place, circling the wreckage of my marriage. The words Laura had said kept replaying in my head. I'll wait, as long as it takes. But what did that even mean? Was there anything left to wait for? I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was one of those old-fashioned places with flickering neon signs and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I needed to sit somewhere that wasn't my car, somewhere that didn't remind me of home. Sliding into a booth by the window, I ordered a black coffee and stared at my phone. I hadn't checked my messages since last night, and a part of me was terrified too. What if Mark had texted Laura again? What if she had responded? I opened our message history, scrolling up to the last texts we had exchanged before everything fell apart. They were so normal. Jokes, reminders about groceries, a simple love you before her flight. It made me sick to think how easily she had said those words while hiding another life from me. The waitress set the coffee down in front of me, offering a sympathetic smile. Rough morning? She asked. I let out a dry laugh. You could say that. She nodded, as if she'd seen this kind of thing before. Maybe she had. I sat there for a long time, stirring my coffee but never drinking it. At some point, I pulled up Mark's number, the man who had stolen what was mine. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice and ask him what made him think he had the right. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. He wasn't the one I had built a life with. Laura was, and that was the hardest truth to swallow. She hadn't been forced into this. She had made the choice, over and over again. By the time I got home, the sky had darkened. I half expected Laura to be gone, but she was still there, sitting on the couch, staring at the necklace I had left on the table. She didn't look up when I walked in. Where did you go? She asked softly. Does it matter? I replied, shutting the door behind me. She exhaled a shaky breath. I thought you might not come back. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat across from her, watching as she ran her fingers over the chain. Finally, I spoke. Tell me the truth. All of it. No more half answers. No more excuses. If you want me to even consider staying, I need everything. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay, she whispered, and with that she began to talk. Laura took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the necklace as if it could anchor her. I sat motionless across from her, my stomach coiled with tension, waiting for the words that would either save or completely destroy what little remained between us. It started months ago, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, it was nothing, just friendly conversation. Mark and I worked on a project together and we talked a lot. I didn't think much of it. But then, I don't know. It felt nice to have someone listen to me in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. I clenched my jaw but said nothing. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. It wasn't because of anything you did, Curtis. I don't want you to think that. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. Don't do that, Laura. Don't try to protect me from the truth. Just tell me. She nodded, wiping at her tear-streaked face. It was emotional before it was physical. We'd stay late after work, talk about everything. Our dreams, our frustrations. And one night, after too many drinks, I kissed him. I felt my stomach turn. Even though I had already known the answer, Hearing her say it made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. She hesitated before continuing. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But it did. And after that, it was impossible to stop. I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply through my nose, trying to keep myself from falling apart. How many times? I asked, my voice flat. Her silence was my answer. I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. How long, Laura? She swallowed hard. Almost 5 months. 5 months. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay in my seat when all I wanted to do was run. Were you ever going to tell me? She hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. I kept telling myself I would stop, that I would find a way to fix things between us before you ever had to know. I laughed bitterly. So I was never supposed to find out. You were just going to pretend like none of this happened. Tears filled her eyes again. I didn't want to lose you. My jaw tightened. You lost me the second you chose him over me. The weight of my words hung in the air between us, suffocating, inescapable. Laura let out a shuddering breath, her body trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I love you, Curtis. That hasn't changed. I stared at her for a long time, searching for the woman I once knew, but all I saw was a stranger. Maybe you do love me, I said quietly, but not enough. She gasped, as if the words physically hurt her. But I couldn't take them back. They were the truth. I stood up, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality wash over me. I need to go, I said, turning toward the stairs. Where are you going? She asked, her voice frantic. To pack. She shot up from the couch. Curtis, please. I turned to face her one last time. I gave you everything, Laura, and it still wasn't enough for you. And with that, I walked upstairs, leaving her behind in the wreckage of what we once had.